Okay, good evening. I'm going to start by introducing the panel, but first of all, just to say that we're going to have a number of questions. We're going to ask the questioner to give that question to the panel. As soon as we've had the responses from the panel, I'm going to throw that open to the floor. If you want to make a further question or a further point, just stick your hand up sometime during that process. Okay, I'm going to ask the panel from my right here to briefly introduce themselves.
Yes, I'm Jan Zablocki. I've lived and worked in the city all my life as an engineer, building a global telecommunications network for you all. And as penitence for that, I've joined the Green Party and represent them tonight.
I'm Dr. Zulfikar Ali. I'm PPC for Liberal Democrats, Stoke Central constituency. I live in the city. I adopted the city as my home a number of years before I got involved in politics. I am father of 3 children. They all go to state school locally, and I know the hustle and bustle families have to face when they look after their families and provide for them and look for providing them good education. I work for NHS. I know the difficulties patients, doctors, and nurses face. I served as a councillor from Henley West and Shelter Ward for 3 years, between 2008 to 2011. I am Liberal Democrat. We're the party of centre ground. We have held Tory party to centre ground in the last 5 years. We didn't let them to carve deep and fast cuts in welfare.
I think we'll leave these points for later, if you don't mind, Dr. Ali. Tristram.
My name is Tristram Hunt. I'm the Labour Member of Parliament for Stoke-on-Trent Central until Monday. I think I'm still a Member of Parliament until Monday. And then I will be Labour's parliamentary candidate. And I'm also the education spokesman for the Labour Party.
My name is Liam Askoff, and I am the Conservative Party candidate for Stoke-on-Trent Central. And currently I am a flight attendant for Virgin Atlantic.
My name's Mick Harold. I'm UKIP's candidate for Stoke-on-Trent Central. I joined UKIP in 2009. I'm the chair of the party locally. I've fought in 3 local elections. I was brought up in Stoke-on-Trent, lived in Stoke-on-Trent all my life. I'm passionate about Stoke and would love to represent the people of Stoke-on-Trent.
Okay, the first question. I hope I get your name right. Richard Bruin or Browan?
Browan, yes.
If you'd like to wait for the mic, sorry.
Sorry. Right, yes. Would the panel members please outline their party's plans? Obviously, there's no manifestos yet, but would the party members please outline their plans to control immigration into the United Kingdom?
Okay, would the members of the panel please outline their plans to control United Kingdom immigration? Mick.
Well, we all know that UKIP, one of our pillars of our policy is our immigration policy. UKIP has always believed that a certain amount of immigration has been good for the UK, but not uncontrolled immigration. We believe that immigration should be controlled. We should be controlling the amount of people that come to this country. And we cannot have uncontrolled immigration from the European Union. It needs to be controlled. We have to cut down on the amount of people that are coming. It's overwhelming. It's overwhelming the National Health Service. It's overwhelming doctors' surgeries. It's affecting all manners of people. It's driving down wages. We've got 25% of the people in the UK in work are on the minimum wage. We believe this is being caused by uncontrolled immigration, which suits for large companies because it gives them a massive pool of labour and drives wages down. This needs to be addressed, and we need to get back to a position where we're controlling our own borders.
Thank you. Jan, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I think the Green Party understands the emotion that's behind this question. And it arises basically because for years politicians wouldn't talk about immigration for fear of being accused of being racist. And unfortunately, I think that's handed the whole issue to UKIP. Now, if we're going to have a meaningful discussion about immigration, its effects and what we can do to alleviate and ease the fears about it, we need a sensible conversation. And we need to talk the truth to each other about it. And the first truth is that various studies, academic independent studies, have shown that migrants who come to Britain, on average, contribute about £5 billion a year. The most recent was University College London, to our economy. And of course, out of that, they pay taxes, national insurance contributions, the same as anyone else. And if there's a criticism about politicians, it is that perhaps they failed to invest that tax and national insurance in building an infrastructure for citizens in terms of schools and hospitals. And we see this particularly as part of austerity. Instead of investing taxes on public services, they're cutting back. So immigration provides an easy target. The fact is there are some 5 million UK citizens living abroad. 2 million of those are in Europe. The Green Party believes that we need to control immigration, and the controls that are in place, we do believe, need to remain in place. However, we do believe we need to tackle the causes, and the causes predominantly for immigration are war and poverty. And if we're to have a realistic, truthful, meaningful conversation about alleviating people's fears about immigration, then we need to talk about how we solve the causes, which is poverty. The more we spread wealth around Europe, the less people will feel the need to leave their homes, to move across Europe to find work. That's the real solution, and that's the real answer to immigration. That's what the Green Party believes. Thank you.
Tristram.
Well, I think in Stoke-on-Trent we can reflect on the extraordinary contribution and achievement of migrant communities to this city down the decades, whether it's the Pakistani Kashmiri community, whether it's the Hungarian community, whether it's the Polish community. And last week in Birch's Head I met a Sicilian who came over to work in the mines in the early 1950s. And they have built modern Stoke-on-Trent. But we also have to appreciate that the last few years have seen remarkable waves of immigration into the UK, which has put strain on public services. And as Mick says, it has also worked to depress wage rates. And when you talk to people who are not racist, who are not hostile to immigrants, they rightly have concerns about how it is affecting the standard of living. So we have to, I'm passionate pro-European, I believe in Europe, but what we have to make sure is that Europe works for us. So what the Labour Party believes is that, first of all, those who come to the UK shouldn't be able to claim benefits on day one. They shouldn't be able to send the child benefit back on day one. That brings into disrepute the whole idea of coming to work, coming to contribute. Secondly, we're absolutely clear that we shouldn't have agencies being able to effectively sack Indigenous workers and go out abroad to bring in entire swathes of foreign workers at lower costs. We've also got to be clear on the minimum wage. We want to work towards a living wage as well. But the way we deal, I think, in the long run with the challenge of immigration is making sure that we've got an education and skills system which equips our young people for the jobs which are currently often being filled by workers from abroad. And in the long run, the way we succeed in terms of globalisation, the challenge of globalisation, is having a really effective education and skills system. It is madness that we are bringing people in from abroad for jobs that we ourselves should be training young people for. So I think there are specific policy areas that we can deal with, but in the long run, it's about education and skills to deal with a situation which isn't going to go away. People will be moving around the world in an era of globalisation. The way we manage it and marshal it is an effective education and skills system.
Thank you. Zulfika.
Thanks, Mick. Thanks, Richard. Excellent question. I welcome the fact that Britain has always been an open society. They welcome people with open arms who have been persecuted in their own countries, in their own societies. I also recognize that immigrants have contributed quite enormously to the economy of this country. The new society you see that has been built by native people who lived in this country for centuries and by immigrants. Now, the immigration fiasco happened during Labour's last 13 years rule. It was uncontrolled, unmanaged immigration. We can take some steps, practical steps to reduce immigration, but at the same time, we also need to realize this fact that our economy also depends on immigration, and higher skilled immigrants would also be needed all the time to come and work, including NHS, where 37% of staff is immigrant. Liberal Democrats in the last 5 years, what they did actually, they cracked on bogus colleges which were issuing visas and allowing people to enter into the United Kingdom. And as a result, in coalition government, we've been able to reduce immigration by 1/3. We're also planning to reintroduce exit checks, which have been abolished by Labour Party. We need to know who is coming to this country, and we also need to know who is overstaying and not going, then we can take certain steps. Regarding Europe, the whole idea being in a free market and one single market is to allow labour to move freely between different countries within the European Union. British people are allowed to work in France and Germany and in other countries in Europe, so the vice versa. And do not forget, there are certain conditions to be part of the European Union. There are conditions relating to democracy, financial stabilization, justice, human rights. All those European unions who are coming to the United Kingdom, once their economic situation in their own countries reaches to a certain level, I'm sure they're going to move back to their own country. They don't have to live unless there's certain reasons, for family reasons or for other reasons. Look at what happened in 80s, early 90s. Spanish and Portuguese, they came, and everybody thought they're going to live here forever, but they didn't. Once the situation in their countries improved, they've gone back. So therefore, we, as Liberal Democrats, we are quite strongly pro-European. We think there are benefits to stay in the European Union, and we shouldn't cause this fiasco of pulling us out of the European Union.
Thank you, sir.
But immigration needs to be managed and needs to be controlled.
Thank you. Liam.
Thank you. I think one of the things is with immigration is that obviously a lot of people want to make it out to be a bad thing, where generally actually it's a really good thing. And one of the success stories actually, I mean, obviously the economy is doing extremely well, and that's one of the reasons we do have a large amount of people wanting to come here. And I don't blame them, because I think if I was living in Southern Europe, I would personally want to come and live in a society and an economy that's actually growing more than anyone else. But it's also the idea that if we stopped immigration now, that would be, all of our troubles would end. We would have, everyone would be employed, everyone, the NHS wouldn't be under strain anymore, all our services would be fine. The reality is that we do have to cope with what we have now. Uncontrolled immigration over the last decade, yes, that was wrong. We shouldn't have had that. We should have been controlling the numbers, and we should have been managing. And we should also have been building more houses. We should have been building better infrastructure to cope with the amount of people coming into the country. We do need to control the numbers because at the moment we're not dealing with it effectively because there are too many people at the moment. As I say, immigration is a good thing, but we just have to deal with the amount of people actually coming into the country. And that's the main thing. It's actually just dealing with the numbers. It's not stopping immigration as such, but it is actually just looking at the numbers and making sure that we have a right amount of facilities to be able to cope with the amount of people coming here, and that we don't end up with the strain on the system that we currently have and have sustained for the last, well, now 15 years or so.
Thank you. Before I throw it open, I just want to know what Richard thinks about those responses. From the badge on your chest, I'll hazard a guess.
Okay.
Briefly,
right,
please.
yes, gentlemen. No, I do agree that immigration is a good thing for the United Kingdom. We're a country built on immigrants. But I do believe that we need to curb immigration. We shouldn't have a free border society. We need to actually bring in immigrants that are going to contribute to this country instead of take away from it and use its wealth. My father is here. He's Irish, all right? And he's come over years ago. He worked all his life, and he contributed to this country. We have a situation where we have people coming into this country, they're not contributing, they're just taking away on the welfare benefit system, and it's unsustainable.
Okay,
There's no way forward.
Okay. Any questions from the floor here? If you could wait for the microphone, it might be helpful. Gentleman with a grey top on there.
Thank you. Yeah, is immigration a real issue? I respect that the gentleman asked a question about the general election and the national situation.
It is the number one issue amongst voters, by the way.
Okay,
51%
I want to ask
say
about
it's the most important issue.
I want to ask about the local situation, because that's why we're here. Is immigration a problem in Stoke? Because I don't feel it.
Tristan, would you like to?
On the doorstep, it is raised time and again, and it's raised in the issue of living standards, cost of living, and the challenge that working men and women face in Stoke-on-Trent, an area where we need to, raise wages substantially, I think, in the coming years, who feel that they have seen their wage rates depressed because very ambitious, very active young men and women have come over from abroad who can sometimes afford to work for less because they haven't got mortgages, they're bunking up together, and these are the experiences that I hear, that has led to a depression in wage rates for certain skilled labourers, where there's an absolute crunch point. And we should be open and honest about that immigration has many benefits, but there are also, at the moment, losers in the equation, and so we need to address that.
Any other points anybody wants to make? The gentleman back there with the glasses. You sound like you've got a loud voice, so if you'd like to shout, you probably don't.
I feel that if it wasn't that the people of England had got above the high horses about immigration and said, no, this is enough, all you on the panel, you 5 people there, would be saying, this is racist to talk about immigration. You wouldn't be saying something needs doing about it. You never have done until recently. None of you. You
Good.
all said, oh, it's okay.
Mick, could I answer that?
Yes, please, Sophie.
Thank you for this question. No, it's not racist to raise concern about immigration. I think demography of the population in the United Kingdom has changed quite rapidly, and that's why some people have raised some concern. It's not racist at all, but some of the political parties, they're trying to make issue of it and trying to get political gains, like United Kingdom Independence Party. I think rather than calling the UK a United Kingdom Independence Party, we should be calling them a party of scrap, because they want to scrap everything: immigration, international aid, European laws, Human Rights Act, everything we have which keeps our society together.
I think I'm just going to interfere, because I think the point the gentleman was making was that until ordinary people raised this as an issue, political parties shied away from it. They were frightened to talk about it. Mick, would you like to say something about that?
Well, I would actually like to question Tristan's answer to the question about what the answers he was getting when he was knocking on doors. And he said that he was getting, people were concerned about immigration. Tristan actually wrote an article in the Sentinel where he actually said he wasn't getting that message on the doorstep.
No, I am getting that message.
No, hang on, Tristan. You said you weren't getting that message in the article you wrote in the Sentinel.
No,
you must have a short memory, Tristan, because it was only about 3 weeks ago you wrote the article.
I don't know which.
You've got a very short memory, Tristan.
I don't know which article you're referring to.
3 weeks ago.
I very much doubt that. But I mean, I'll return to it again. I think it's only right that politicians respond to what they hear on the doorstep. If we're not talking about something, if it's not being raised with us on the doorstep, then obviously it's not at the front of the public mind, which means it's not at the front of politicians' minds. If it is being raised on the doorstep, then quite rightly it comes to the front of our consciousness. So I think that is the importance of having frequent and open conversations, so that exactly these issues are given voice to. And what we shouldn't do is to dismiss fears or to say they're not worthy or not right. If we hear them, we have to find solutions to them, rather than, I would suggest, just the politics of anger about it.
We must move on to the next question, but I would just say that in 2 hours of a similar event, the youth hustings last night, filled with young people, not one young person raised the issue of immigration. It was not a concern for them. I shall just say that. Anyway, thank you for those answers, and we have to move on quickly, I'm afraid. I know there are a few people who still want to talk. I'll try and bring you in later on something else. This is a question from an audience member who doesn't want to give it, so I'm going to give it on their behalf. Ofsted have just told us that Stoke-on-Trent has some of the worst schools in the country. Why is this, and what can we do about it? Tristram, Shadow Education Minister.
Well, it's a very. I mean, I would urge I'd urge everyone to read the report because it's, I mean, there are reports on individual schools, primary and secondary, and then there's the broader report on the role and function of the local authority. I think we can step back on this, on the broader picture. It seems to me there is a challenge of educational attainment within the city which has some historic causation, and it's not unique to Stoke-on-Trent. You can look to other great industrial cities. This is a city of extraordinary skills, but yet didn't always put a great emphasis on official educational attainment, because young men and women could leave school at the age of 16 and go right through their careers with, you know, fulfilling, prosperous jobs. And so an ethic of schooling sometimes, of formal education, wasn't always there. And you could make the same argument in Liverpool and other cities. None of that is acceptable now, because the future of the city, as I said earlier, depends on a successful education and skills system. So there are things we have to do. We have to keep our head teachers longer. We've only got 4 head teachers in the city who've been in post longer than 3 years. If you're having that kind of chop and change, that's a disaster. We've got to attract high-quality teachers into the city, and I know the council is beginning to work on those kind of packages, because high-quality teaching is the absolute key to getting the results that we need. We've got to get parents supportive of kids going to school, being at school, succeeding at school. We've got to have high ambition and aspiration around that. Ofsted is very clear we need to work harder on pupil premium to make sure that we're using the money for disadvantaged pupils more effectively. We've got excellence in the city. There are excellent schools in the city, and you only have to see the turnaround of the Stanley Matthews Academy to know that there are brilliantly bright children in Stoke-on-Trent who, when they're given the right schooling and given the right structures, achieve remarkable things. And we must make sure that that excellence is being shared across the city. So I think we need stronger leadership from the local authority. I'm continue to play my part as a member of Parliament, but we also have to make sure that some of the academy chains in this city are doing their job. And frankly, I don't think they are at the moment. And I will hold the local authority to account and call them out where they're, not stepping up to the plate. But we also have to know that the local authority, their capacity over some academy chains is not particularly strong. So this is a generational programme. It can be done, and as I say frequently to the council, we need to look to Coventry. Coventry's primary schools were in a terrible state a few years ago, and thanks to sustained political leadership, the heads working together, high quality teachers coming into the city, they've transformed the results, and so it can and should be done.
Jan, and bearing in mind, of course, that academies have very limited control over the secondary schools in Stoke-on-Trent, what are your opinions here?
They have virtually none, and that's the truth. And the big problem is that education has been far too much politicised by all the political parties. And what that's led to is a fragmentation in education, with academies, free schools, and schools still under the control of the local education authority. I wrote recently, and it was my own research in the Evening Sentinel, about the dismal and depressing discovery that out of 150 and more education authorities in England, Stoke-on-Trent was ranked somewhere in the 130s out of those 150. We are failing the young people of our city, and it isn't. I really do reject this notion that it's about good quality teachers. It seems to suggest that so many of our teachers are not good quality. And I know teachers, I talk to them, who are extremely dedicated. And I reject that notion on their behalf. The reality is, with austerity, we're not investing enough in public services, we're not investing enough in schools. We're mucking about with the funding, with PFI and other mechanisms, academies and free schools, instead of getting down to the task of creating a solid, sustainable economy in this city that gives people hope and reason to learn at school, so that they can be sure when they come out of school and the education system, they've got jobs that are secure and well paid to go into. And the reason we haven't got that is we haven't got the political leadership that has created those circumstances for the young people of this city. That's what's wrong with education. It's become too politicised. And we need to get back to the basics. I mean, Tristram described the Green Party policy because we would get rid of academies, we would get rid of free schools, we'd bring them back under the education authorities control, so they're accountable to local politicians, accountable to taxpayers. We were described by Tristram Hunt just a couple of weeks ago with wanting to take education policy back to the 1970s, and in that sense we may well do, and I make no apologies for it, because that's what's needed. Thank you.
Liam, five years of Michael Gove et al. How are we in this position in Stoke-on-Trent?
Well, I think, again, it's one of those important things about holding, Tristram did actually say about holding people to account. And if, in the last 5 years as a Member of Parliament for this constituency, if you've not held anyone to account and we have this situation we're in now, then I'm not entirely sure what you were doing. But the biggest thing here is to actually look at what's going right as well, because it's not all bad. There's a lot of good that's happening as well. We can't just dismiss everything straight away and saying Stoke-on-Trent is it's all wrong, there's nothing going right here whatsoever. There are some fantastic teachers here. There are some fantastic schools here. The academies are doing a good job in some places. Birch's Head, where I was the other day, doing a fantastic job. There are children there now who are taking their GCSEs who a couple of years ago wouldn't have even bothered to do it. But now we're looking at getting about 50 odd, maybe a bit in the higher 50s, percentage pass rates for them, which only a year or two ago wouldn't even been heard of, because people are working together. I think it's where we all have to come together and actually understand there is a problem here. We've got to be positive. We've got to be aspirational. We've got to all turn around and say, Stoke is a lot more than what we think it is, because that's what a lot of the children have said to me in the past. They said, well, we weren't expected to do well, but you can do well. And it's about believing in people and getting everyone together to work together through the academy system, through the local authority, to get people to actually believe in the children of Stoke and actually give them that future that they deserve, and to aspire to be all that they can be. And that's what we've got to do, as opposed to actually just tearing each other up and having a go at each other and taking us back to the 1970s. Because let's face it, the 1970s in terms of education wasn't particularly great. It's better now than it ever has been. We've got more students going to universities. We've got more students going to taking up academies. And I think that's something we've got to be positive. We've got to be positive and actually talk Stoke up, rather than actually just talking it down and saying, let's go back 30 or 40 years.
Zulfikar.
Thanks, Mick. This is an excellent question, actually. I'm sitting here, and my English about education and Ofsted inspection report in Stoke-on-Trent is same as anyone else sitting in this auditorium and listening. I have 3 children. They all go to state school, and I'm really, really worried about their education and their future. Last year, my youngest son, he was going to study at Mill Hill School, Mill Hill Primary in Tunstall, and that failed after inspection. After a while, looking into what else I can do to make his education provision better, I moved him to St. Wilfred School. With good luck, he started improving there. Now, a couple of weeks ago, when it came to parents' evening and subject option evening, I went to school and found out that my son, who is in year 9, he has no option to read any language other than French. So much limited curriculum here in Stoke-on-Trent is being provided. And only today, 3:30, he came back from school and told me, Dad, I've been told by the vice principal that we can't read history for GCSE. Why not? Because there are not enough children. That's not the way how this education system should be working. Tristram is sitting here, is educational spokesperson for Labour Party, is Shadow Secretary of State. Labour Party has given failure to this city all the time. Look at education. They've given us brighter, shiny buildings, but they crammed the classrooms. In their previous time, they closed so many primary schools in Stoke-on-Trent. There's one standing here in Shelton, is still standing there as sore thumb. They closed out of 3 schools, primary schools in Shelton, and they closed one and moved children to 2, crammed the classrooms, so much so that Etruscan Primary was forced to open new classrooms in Portak Evans. That's not the way we want to provide all children education.
Okay, we need to know what you're going to do about it, because these answers are going to be shorter and sharper.
To improve educational assignments across the country, Liberal Democrats take very pride to introduce pupil premium, 2.5 billion project. which is used by school teachers, school head teachers to improve educational attainments of children. And in Stoke-on-Trent Central, in the last 5 years, £10.9 million have come. And I'm amazed this Stoke-on-Trent City Council has not made school teachers, head teachers accountable where that money is being spent. Similarly, Labour Party has given us these academies. They have reduced the number of high schools from 17 to 14, and these academies are failing us. There's no accountability at local level at all, and wherever there's accountability, there's no problem. Our policy is to improve standards. There should be an independent standard board which should be consisting of panel of experts, and they should be driving up standards of education and exams. And we need to have each and every teacher certified school teacher.
Okay, so we need to move on. I'm going to bring in Mick now to UKIP's education policy.
Well, I personally, I just think schools have got too big. Centralisation of schools, like centralisation of a lot of other things. If we've got big, I think we've become more dysfunctional. Obviously, when Labour started to privatise schools through the PFI contracts, there's been massive waste of money. I know personally, because I personally worked on the schools under PFI and saw with my own eyes massive amounts of money wasted. Schools were actually modernised and cost millions of pounds, and 2 or 3 years later they were knocked down. So basically the money that's gone into the schools basically is being wasted. UKIP would introduce apprentice qualifications for students instead of 4 non-core GCSEs, and we would encourage students to take up these apprenticeship schemes. We would abolish the target of 50% of school leavers going to university. We think it's unnecessary. We think that's been a big waste of money. We've got no problem with people going to university, but I don't think we need to have targets. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're going to have another question from the floor, which is an education-related question, and after that I'll briefly throw it over. But if we can keep our answers to these questions relatively brief, we've got relatively little time.
Thank you, Mick. My name's Richard Gibbons. As a grandparent with 3 granddaughters aged 4, 5 and 6, I'm appalled at a proposition that sex education for 5-year-olds be added to the school curriculum. Can the members of the panel advise on their party's policy? Sex
education for 5-year-olds. Jan?
Well, the short and sharp answer is we have got no policy to bring sex education to 5-year-olds. We do support the concept of sex education, obviously, and particularly in higher schools as part of citizenship education. But we have no proposals or
Do you think
policy.
it's too early?
Do I think it's too personally with regard to, I suppose I could say I did study psychology for 4 years, including child development and psychology, and I do think the concepts might be rather too difficult for children at such a young age to grasp. So I do personally think it's too early, yes.
Okay. So Fika, the medical view maybe.
We believe in age-appropriate sex and relationship education to school children. But personally, and I live in as a party, we do not have any special policy for sex education for 5 years old. I think it's too early, far too early. In fact, my youngest son started speaking by the age of 5. How could I expect him to understand sex education?
Christian, thank you.
Well, I've got a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 7-year-old. And if my 5-year-old and 7-year-old were taught about the importance of marriage and stable relationships and love and parenting, I think that's a great part of their education. So the Labour Party believes in age-appropriate relationship and sex education. And of course you're not going to teach 5-year-olds about sex. But you are going to teach them about the importance of relationships and love and parenting. And I think that's an important part of their emotional and social development. So I'm all for age-appropriate relationship and sex education, and I'm looking forward to introducing it.
Liam?
I'll
let you speak in a minute, sir, if you...
You do have to, again, it's all down to being age appropriate and what's appropriate for a certain, for a 5-year-old, yes, there's certain things you couldn't possibly teach because they wouldn't understand. But it's actually just, it's understanding that sort of time frame. But And it's being very mindful of obviously parents' views at the same time. Personally, my point of view is no, 5-year-old would be too young for that, but that's my personal point of view.
Mick?
Personally, I think it's appalling to even consider, teaching kids of 5 sex education. I mean, everybody you speak to is be totally alarmed by it. If it would even be considered. I mean, I would think certainly there should be some sex education in schools, but maybe not started till maybe 10 years of age, maybe 12, but certainly not at 5 years of age. I think personally it's bordering on child abuse.
Would you like to add something other than rubbish to your statement, or would you?
What he was saying, I mean, like Mick says, talking about sex education to 5-year-olds. Like Mick said, it's bordering on child abuse.
But no
I
one's
think
saying
Tristan was,
talking
I don't think
about
Tristan
sex.
actually said that.
What is it
talking
you
about
talk,
sex.
what is it you explain yourself?
Okay, so the Labour Party, unlike the other political parties, believes that we should have statutory, age-appropriate relationship and sex education. So in primary schools, you can teach about the importance of family and parenting and good relationships. And then only when you get up into secondary school are you possibly going to begin to teach about sex education. But when we see the dangers to young people, when we read about child sexual exploitation, when we think about social media today and the pressure which teenagers are under, we think the education system has a role in ensuring that young people have the confidence to deal with that at an age-appropriate stage.
Thank you.
And so that's why the Labour Party wants that, but no one wants to teach.
The lady in the second row there. Sorry, I haven't got time. The lady in the second row there.
I think that the question was out of context. I don't think anybody was proposing to teach the intimacy of sex to 5-year-olds. I think that all the research would tell us that where relationship education is taught to children at a young age, like in Holland, their teenage pregnancy rates are so low, and we can't boast that. So we do have to have a look at what we're doing in terms of relationship education in schools.
Okay, the lady in the front, and then we're going to have to move on, I'm afraid. I'll come back to you, Richard.
Yes, this isn't about sex. It's a question which relates to the living wage issue. And
No, we're not talking about that at the moment. We're talking about, that raises another issue, unfortunately, which we can't. We will talk about that within the context of another question. Richard, do you want to come back with your response to the panel?
Yeah, thank you. Tristan has got a very short memory. I remember the article that Mick referred to, by the way, about the doorstep. But more importantly, I read in the press, I don't believe everything I read in the press, but apparently he launched this at a school in London, at Newham, accompanied by what I call a politically correct entourage, to plug Labour's plans for sex education for all children from the age of 5.
And what newspaper was that in?
Sorry?
Where was that report from?
Does it matter?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, you banned the...
It definitely does. I'm afraid, Richard, it does matter.
I'm not here to answer questions, Tristan. I'm here to ask them.
It might be helpful if we did know what newspaper it was. If it was the Daily Mail, we might
it was the Daily
attach
Mail,
some,
does it?
attach some weight to it.
Listen, excuse me, he banned the press from this meeting, but unfortunately it actually got out. But allegedly...
Sorry, nobody, the press were not banned from this meeting at all.
No, the one in Newham at the school.
Oh, sorry.
I mean,
one question... worried there for a moment.
Yeah, no, one question I'd like to ask is why didn't you launch this policy in a school in Stoke-on-Trent? Allegedly it was to get away from homophobic bullying, but telling 5-year-olds... shouldn't we get back to what they're there to learn?
I think we're going to move on now because I think we're
I'm
a dead
happy
end
to
here.
discuss this afterwards. I'm very happy to explain.
Is David Pazier here? David Pazier? No. Is Robert Roach here? No. These are people who put questions through. So I'm going to jump. If we have time for those questions, which are about the economy, I'll come back to an economy question. But I want to ask a question that's of particular interest to many of the people here, and certainly to my constituency. So I'd like Fee Wood has got a question. Have you got the microphone there for Fee?
She's at the back. I think your guy's at the back.
Oh, sorry. All right.
Robert Roach.
All right, we'll briefly deal with your question then, Robert.
Okay.
We have to be quick, by the way, with the responses on the panel. We're running out of time.
Given the many failures of our local NHS hospitals to deliver adequate care, What will the panel members specifically do to improve the situation locally?
Our local NHS hospitals are failing to deliver adequate care. What will the members panel do to rectify this problem? And again, if we can be brief, Mick.
UKIP, yeah, we've pledged to, obviously, we would put an extra £3 billion into the NHS, but we would ensure that the £3 billion was spent on doctors and nurses and not administration and management.
Okay, thank you. Well, that was nice and brief. Well done. Liam.
Well, obviously, over this Parliament, we put an extra £12.7 billion into the NHS, which is actually, you know, the reason behind that is because we have a strong economy now and a growing economy. And I think that's the most important thing that we do have to remember. If we do want to continue investing into the NHS, and which we've promised to do over the next Parliament, to also continue to increase the money that we put into the NHS, then we do need to actually have a strong economy so we can actually manage to do that.
Okay, Tristram.
Well, what the Labour Party would do is, first of all, get more money to the National Health Service by introducing a mansion tax on properties valued at over £2 million, along with a tax on tobacco and the hedge funds. The National Health Service needs more money, it needs greater investment, and we in the North Staffordshire health economy need it more than most. And what we'd also do is repeal the Tory and Lib Dem Health and Social Care Bill, which has introduced so much privatisation and competition into the National Health Service. And we've announced that's going to be one of our first acts today. And this is, again, particularly the issue in Staffordshire. The privatisation of the cancer provision in Staffordshire, with the Tories and Lib Dems pushing it, is really bad news. You talk to the hospitals and they're really worried about what that is going to do to their income stream. So, you know, there's a challenge with mid-staffs. There's a challenge with how we make the transition from mid-staffs to Royal Stoke. There's a big challenge to move into the new site. But what we need from a national government, and it's only going to be a Labour Party which will deliver this, is more investment into our health service and an end to the privatisation of recent years.
Saltika, for the Liberal Democrat prescription for the NHS.
Thanks, Robert. NHS is facing a lot of problems, and quite a lot of these problems are universal across the UK, and some of these are particularly specific for Stoke-on-Trent. We are living longer, life expectancies are better, and when you're in the 80s and 90s, whenever we become unwell, we go to hospital. We don't go with one medical illness, we go with a raft of different illnesses. It takes longer to stay in, it needs longer treatment. As a result, bed occupancy is longer. But at this time, what happened actually, we have longer life expectancy, but in the last 20 years, the bed base has been shed by 1/3. We used to have something around 180 beds, 180,000 beds in the United Kingdom, in England. But now we have something around 120,000 beds. And that most of the shedding of beds happened during Labour's 13 years rule. I'm sorry to say it again, I don't think Tristram is going to like it, but that's the fact. And Tristram is basically trying to misrepresent here. It's not the coalition government which has introduced private contracts in the NHS, it is his party. By the time Gordon Brown left office, there were 5% of the contracts were going to private firms. And at the time, there were only 6%, there's only 1% increase. Now, locally, what happened actually, the bed number has been reduced from 1,400 when I was working as registrar in in the City General Hospital in 2001. Now it's something around 900. And why this has happened? It's mainly happened because that's their policy nationally, and secondly, they have bound us to a private finance initiative contract. Labour Party has given us a new building, shiny building. We welcome that one, but that money has not come from public purse. It has come from private organization, and managers have to save money each and every month to pay back to the PFI. NHS England Chief Executive Simon Stevens is asking for £8 billion. Labour's £2.5 billion are not going to near to what he's asking. They are going to just afford the cost of staff only. Liberal Democrats are the only party which has come with £8 billion, and we have delivered £2 billion already in this budget.
Thank you. Jan, are our hospitals this bad? And if they are, what are you going to do about it if Greens get elected?
Well, I had a cycling accident not so long ago, and I must say that the treatment I had was absolutely first class.
Yeah, we can all have individual responses
well,
to this.
we need to bear that in
Anecdotal
mind.
information is not reliable, as you know.
Absolutely, but I have to say that. Look, let's have the truth. The proportion of our national wealth we spend on our health service in the UK is 9.6% of our annual wealth. In France, it's 11.7%, in Germany, it's 11.5%, and in the USA, it's 17.6%. Now, with austerity, that is only going to get worse for us. The truth, we need to know this. Professor Prem Sikka at the University of Exeter, Essex, Professor of Accountancy, he's calculated that over the next 25 years, we will be paying back to the private sector £301 billion as a result of PFI introduced by previous governments. These are Prem Sikka's calculations. We need to know this. Out of that 301 billion, 247 billion is profit to the companies who funded PFI. That's an independent report. What the Green Party would do, we would end privatisation and marketisation of the NHS. It is in our manifesto. What I do find jars with me is that recently I had to write in response to Tristram Hunt to the Evening Sentinel about the issue of the privatisation of end-of-life and cancer care in North Staffordshire, because he wrote in his Personally Speaking column that the opposition to that was knee-jerk. He seemed to be just, you did, Tristram, and I wrote a letter to the Letter of the Sentinel editor challenging that. The opposition isn't knee-jerk, it's well-founded. Privatisation of the NHS, privatisation of services, takes money out of the NHS to pay billions of pounds profit to companies. We don't need it. It's a drain on the NHS like a leech is on a body. We need to get rid of it, and the Green Party will.
Thank you, Dan. You've no idea how happy you've made Tristram. Somebody reads his Personally Speaking column. Somebody has to.
That's a different question.
I've got nothing better to do.
I'm really anxious to get two more questions in, if we possibly can. We started a little bit late. The answers got longer and longer, you will notice, as that round got on. But I really want to get in a question from Fee, because this is a matter of huge concern to those of us within the university community, as Fee is.
University and college fees and associated loans and debts are preventing many people from accessing further and higher education and stifling innovation in Britain. How will you, as the elected representatives for a university and further education constituency, work for students, and will any of you be pressing for a free education system?
How are you working for students? Are you going to provide or try and provide a free education system? If there is such a thing as a free education system, I'm not sure there is. Jan?
The Green Party, so far as I know, is the only party represented here that will state in its manifesto and will be determined to end student fees. Students are burdened, young people, with a cost of university education of about an average of £40,000 per student. There is absolutely no reason whatsoever why we should place that burden on young people seeking to build a future and a life in our country. We are the 6th richest economy on this planet. We used to allow people, when I was young, I could have gone to university. I went to college, actually this place, to study in higher education. It was free. And when I earned a good wage, a good income, because I had a good education, I paid more tax to repay the education that I'd received. That is the system that we would revert to. We would end student fees, and we would fund it by changing the taxation system so that those people who can afford to pay more would pay more, both in personal tax and in wealth taxes. But we'd also act to end tax avoidance and evasion. And I'll finish on one statistic for you. In 2004, there were 93,000 inland revenue staff collecting tax in Britain. Today, there are 52,000.
Okay,
That tells you all you need to know about how serious some political parties are about taxation and getting tax from the wealthy.
Sulfico, I'm interested in your answer, and I'm interested to know whether anyone will ever trust the Liberal Democrats on higher education again.
Fee, this is an excellent question, and I was waiting for this question somebody asked me. When we went to general election last time, we had two manifesto policies for election, for 2010 elections, as far as education is concerned. One was tuition-free higher education, and the other one was pupil premium to help social mobility and start supporting children at an early age. We went into coalition. We didn't win overall victory. We were given a mandate of third party. Obviously, Labour Party was the second party, and Conservative Party was the first party. They were given the larger mandate, so they had the bigger say in what we can deliver. We tried to, obviously, to have an agreement on education. Only thing out of two policies we were able to get was our pupil premium. We were not able to fulfill our manifesto commitment of tuition-free education. By the time we devised this policy, country's finances were sound and strong. By the time we went into coalition, Labour Party just finished their 13 years rule. Economy was in ruins. There was a big black spot in economy of 160 billion pound deficit. 160 billion pound deficit is not a small amount. We felt unable to get this manifesto pledge met really. But what we tried to do, in response to Brown Commission, which was set up by Gordon Brown before he left the office to look for funding for higher education, we tried to make it as fair as possible. We made sure that nobody pays any tuition fee up front, and when it comes to payback, they don't pay a single penny before they're able to make £21,000 a year. And we tried to make maintenance grants fairer. That's what we did. I was speaking to senior lecturer of Staffordshire University tonight, Arshad Ahmed, who works in finance department, and Mr. Malouk, who also works in finance department. I, in fact, had coffee with them this afternoon in the university cafeteria. And they both said, since introduction of tuition fee, number of students or coming to university have gone up. And they think standard education has been driven up as well. So I don't think this has put anybody off from getting into university. And make no mistakes, tuition fee was introduced by Labour Party in 1998, increased by Labour Party in 2004, and by the time they left office, they left economy in ruins, and they left us with a report from Brown Commission asking us to increase the tuition fee.
Okay, I think some people might think that you made a promise that you didn't think you'd ever have to keep, to be blunt. But I won't accept Labour from criticism in this issue.
We were not given mandate to implement each and every manifesto pledge. We were having a limitation what we could get.
Mick, UKIP's view on a free education system maybe, and how you could help students?
I think we'd all like to have a free education system, but I mean whether it's affordable, obviously we would have to raise the money. The money's got to come from somewhere. As you know, UKIP, we would save massive amounts of money by withdrawing from the European Union and cutting overseas aid by £9 billion. Trident's got nothing to do with UKIP. He's on about Trident. He's talking about education, not Trident.
I think he's positing certain ways of saving a lot of money by getting rid of Trident, but that's not on the agenda at the moment. So
UKIP would,
please, Nick, go on.
we would remove tuition fees for approved degrees. Obviously, we encourage people to take up these degrees in science, engineering, and medical subjects, which we believe is very important. The 50% target would also be removed because in UKIP we believe that too many people were going to university when they probably weren't academically qualified enough to take the courses, and they were just looking at it as a career move. And I think if we reduce the amount of people that go into university, there would be more money to go around. But I would just like to end by just saying, let's just hope if we do end up with a future Labour government ever again, that we do not introduce PFI into universities, because this would be another massive drain on universities.
Thank you, mate. Thee's question was also about further and higher education. The Conservative Party, scrapping education maintenance allowance, for example, and other things, lost a lot of support amongst young people over the last 5 years. How are you going to get that back, and what are your policies to get the support of young people by your education policies?
Well, I don't think actually we've lost an awful lot of support by scrapping the EMAs. Not to my knowledge, because we probably, in some respects, we might not have ever had that before, if you believe the polls. So I'm not entirely sure we've lost that one there. But to go back to, in terms of with the university fees, we actually have more people going to university now than we ever have done before. So it's obviously not putting people off. And I remember when I started university in '98, I was in the first year of the fees that were actually brought in then. They were obviously, as I said, they were brought into the Labour government at that time. But it didn't stop any of us from going, because we all felt that we were going to have a better future from going to university and paying for it that way, because we have to make the money some way. And generally, most university graduates will earn more, so it is a fair way of saying, well, if I'm going to have this opportunity over someone else, then we have to pay for it somehow. And in the long term, and it doesn't saddle, I know when people say it saddles you with debt, and it's debt that you can actually pay off over a longer time, that sometimes you don't actually even have to end up paying back off, because I still unfortunately have some of my student loans. I think it's important, though, that we do fund universities properly, that we don't shirk around and not look at it in a factual way. As I say, the way that the Labour Party have decided that they want to reduce tuition fees to £6,000, that sounds fantastic. But the actual increasing the interest rates to 4% will actually harm people on lower wages who graduate and are on lower wages. Will take them a lot longer to pay it back. So in theory, actually, it's hurting the people that you want to help in terms of social mobility. But keeping the interest rates low, it does actually help people get on. But I do think, as I say, it's the idea that university is the only way forward is wrong. We now have apprenticeships, so there are different avenues to encourage that. But as I say, I don't think saying that the tuition fees, yes, are not fantastic, but they're not actually discouraging people from going to university, because we actually do have more people going to university than ever before.
Thank you, Nick. Tristan, your party, of course, first introduced them in 1998. Can you defend that, or do you think that was a good idea?
Well, I mean, first of all, let's be absolutely clear that the Liberal Democrats went into the last election
I know that. Everybody knows that one. And I acknowledge that one. You don't have to go on Lib Dems.
Offering a lie to the British people.
Not lie. You didn't leave any money in Kitty. Don't forget Liam Bond's note.
I must interject here and say that if every failed manifesto promise was called a lie, there would be there are a lot of lies floating around Westminster anyway.
We know from the aftermath that Danny Alexander and Vince Cable knew they could never introduce this policy, and as Mick said, because they thought they'd never be in government. And so their policy was to eliminate tuition fees, and instead they voted to triple them. We went from one of the most competitive rates for tuition fees to amongst the most expensive in the world. And that did put off many young people going towards university.
I don't agree with that one. I think numbers have gone up.
And we need to hold the Liberal Democrats to account for that. And it did great damage to politics. Those young people who queued to vote for Nick Clegg on his promise of what he would do in terms of his manifesto felt completely betrayed. And those of us as MPs and in politics the last few years are trying to pick up the pieces on that. So when we say we're going to reduce tuition fees from £9,000 to £6,000, I can tell you we're going to do it, and I can tell you how we're going to pay for it. We're going to make those people with high incomes getting good tax relief on their pensions afford the money to pay for a reduction in tuition fees, because we think that we need some intergenerational equity. Young people have borne the brunt of the austerity crisis of recent years. Okay. And it is only the Labour Party which is going to invest in our education, and FE as well, Fee, because we always miss out further education colleges. It's only the Labour Party which is going to invest in post-16 further education as well, because to go back to the original answer, the way cities like Stoke-on-Trent succeed is investing in our education, and that's schools, that's FE, and that's HE. And Mick, it also means being part of Europe. I think if we left Europe, I think the bosses at Staffordshire University would be very, very worried about some of their funding streams. We're getting money into Stoke, into Staffordshire University by being part of Europe.
No, you're not, Trish. You know, it's our money. It's our money being recycled. The EU doesn't produce any money.
No, we're getting a net.
EU does not produce money. How do we get money off the EU? It doesn't produce any.
Very briefly, I don't want to bring feedback, sorry, because I want our current student union president to actually make a comment on what she's heard. But if you could keep it fairly brief, or briefer than the panel anyway.
Yes, fine. I'm Mel. As Mick said, I'm president here at the Students' Union. I agree with two of you said it hasn't put students off the tuition fees. It hasn't. However, student life at the moment is absolutely dire. EMA is gone. If I hadn't got EMA when I was in college, I wouldn't have been able to afford to eat. So I wouldn't have got into university. I wouldn't be sat where I am now. We have tripled in tuition fees. Student rented accommodation is going through the roof. A lot of middle-class students, actually, their loan does not cover the rent, and that's actually at a deficit. We've had to set up a food hub at the Students' Union for students. The majority of the inquiries that I've been getting are from students from middle-class backgrounds because their parents can't afford to top up the money that they are getting. And it just, also we had the disabled students allowance was getting threatened, had a threat against it as well. What are all of you going to do to make sure that students are actually catered for? Because at the moment, talking about tuition fees is a bit of a get-out clause, to be honest, because tuition fees is one thing, it's how students actually going to live now.
I don't think we have time. I don't think we have time for all the answers to that. I will say that in 30 years of teaching higher education, more and more of my students are actually working more and more hours in order to stay at university. That's a fact. I'm looking at Maria to see whether we can go on for a few more minutes, because we haven't had a question about one more question. Stoke's economy, a general question. But I know Catherine has got a specific point she wants to make. I'd prefer it if you made it a general specific point, if you understand what I mean, rather than about the situation of people within the university.
Sure. Well, it does pertain to the general living wage issue. So the question is, would panel members please tell us how their respective policies will help to stem the widespread use of zero and variable hours contracts in higher and further education, and the increasing casualisation of university and further education.
I think we'd like to extend that to
yes.
the use of those contracts in general, because they, sorry.
Thank you. Excellent question. 0 hours contracts exist in the British market for many, many years, and Labour Party had an excellent chance to stamp them out, but they didn't. They're just making mockery of that now. 0 hours their abuse has escalated after the economic collapse happened due to Labour's 13 years rule. What we could do, we could look for an exclusivity clause and try to ban them. And that's Vince Cable, Secretary of State for Skills and Business, has consulted public, has consulted businesses, and has outlawed them now. There's no blanket ban on exclusivity clause. Anybody who is employed on 0 hour contract is free to look for another job, and his employer is not able to hold him back.
Tristram, you said last night that Labour, you seemed to say that Labour were going to ban 0 hours contracts. For all your literature, all I can see is that you're going to reform them in some way. Can you be clear about that, about your approach?
We're going to ban exploitative 0 hours contracts.
No,
you've already done that.
You've added
We've done that.
exploitative.
Vince Cable has done that.
You've added the word exploitative there. I think the people would appreciate. Are you going to ban 0 hours contracts?
We're going to ban exploitative 0 hours contracts.
Listen, suddenly I'm like Jeremy Paxman. I'll ask you the question again. Are you going to ban 0 hours contracts?
And I will explain to you, if you give me a moment, Nick.
I'm sorry, I came over all Paxman there, sorry.
Hell yeah, as we say. There are contexts within which 0 hours contracts can work for employees if they want them. the situation is incredibly exploitative when you're waiting for a phone call or a text message in the morning for a 0 hours contract which doesn't give you the stability for a proper income to allow you to get a decent mortgage, all those other elements of building a proper professional career in life. And so this government has seen a massive expansion of 0 hour contracts on their watch. And a Labour Party, as Ed announced again, will ban exploitative 0 hours contracts. And I think it is a particular issue for universities. Universities have done well in the last few years in terms of their financing. We've seen lots of cranes around university campuses. We've seen lots of investment in universities. And I think for the investment they've had, they should also be ensuring that, exactly as you point out, in terms of respecting those working here and the casualisation that needs to be addressed.
Okay, so I think we can be clear that you're not going to ban 0 hours contracts. Liam, please.
Exactly.
You're going to ban exploitative.
But I think we're already...
either going to have a Labour government or a Tory government.
Well, let's hear the Tory version.
Anyway.
Labour government...
Labour along with SNP.
...will be one that bans exploitative 0 hours contracts.
We're already legislating and talking about actually banning because we're... And also, do you know what it is? And why not beforehand under the last Labour government for 13 years? But nonetheless, I think it's very important to always bring it and contextualise it, that regardless if you're in favour of 0 hour contracts or not, I mean, I'm not particularly in favour of them, and I'm a massive supporter of the living wage, and I think that's the way forward that we should go anyway. But the actual amount of the percentage is 2.2% of all jobs in this country are actually 0 hour contracts. So in contextual lies, if you put it into a whole, it's actually not that many. To me, it's too many. I think it should be less. You know, I'd like to see more people in full-time, secure employment. It does actually work for some people, and that's why we can't ban them outright, because some people, journalists, some lecturers, for example, actually enjoy working on 0 hours contracts, and that's fine if that's what you want. You know, it's about choice. Again, it may be no, but again, it's about choice. What might work for you doesn't work for someone else. So it's down to this thing called choice, and that's why when you talk about freelance journalists, they obviously exist on 0 hour contracts. But for those who actually, you know, don't want to be, we need to work. We need to work towards providing full employment and jobs that are secure, and that's what we're doing. And that's why we've created 1.9 million jobs over this course of this Parliament, and we'll continue to do that, bringing the number of people unemployed down and those employed to the record high number that they're at.
I must point out that there is a difference between freelance and 0 hours, by the way, a significant difference. Mick Harold, please.
I think the whole concept of 0 hour contracts needs to be looked at. I have to agree with some of the panellists, but I think maybe some people, you know, be all suited by 0 hour contracts, but I think it needs to be regulated, and we have to stop companies abusing 0 hour contracts.
Jan, finally.
Well, as a trade unionist for 40 years in the Communication Workers Union, I know a fair bit about 0 hours contracts, and I talk to quite a lot of people who have been affected by 0 hours contracts. And Liam, I can tell you that there's more people under 25 years of age working on 0 hours contracts than any other age group. And it's quite a significant issue for the young of this country who are caught in the poverty trap of 0 hours contracts, which, by the way, the numbers have increased in the past 6 months from 1.4 to 1.8 million in the last 6 months alone. 0 hours, you know, we need to get at the truth about this. Tristram Hunt said last night he's going to ban 0 hours contracts. He never used the word exploitative. And what he means by that, exploitative, is there is a clause in 40%, it's up to 40%, somewhere between 25-40% of 0 hours contracts, that commits the employee to the single employer. It prevents them from working from anyone else. That's what they're going to ban. The Green Party will ban...
No, just only this has been done now. There's no more work they're going to do on that.
You think there's no one on those contracts?
If I can finish, please, if I can finish. The Green Party will ban all 0 hours contracts. It's a misnomer to suggest, and it's misleading, and it's dishonest of politicians to suggest that excluding the exclusion clause would ban 0 hours contracts. It wouldn't. Okay. They would continue. And freelance journalists and the like are self-employed. They're not on 0 hours contracts. There's no difference between the 1930s and now with 0 hours contracts when people used to wait outside the factory gates in the 1930s and they could be seen waiting for work. People now wait at home. People now wait at home on the end of a telephone for a call to call them into work. And I'll tell you, if they're late into work, if they have a disagreement with their manager, or if they don't turn up when they're scheduled to turn up, they then are penalised by their employer and are refused hours of work for the next week or two.
Okay, thank you, Jan.
They don't need exclusion clauses. We need to ban them.
Thank you. Catherine, a brief response, if you could, to some of the things you've heard.
They're exploitative.
Well, I haven't heard anything, nor have I seen anything in any of the literature produced by any of the parties represented here which inspires confidence. The legislation would need to be very, very tight indeed to prevent unscrupulous employers wiggling out. Legislation so far has not worked, and I'm highly doubtful that anything that comes in from any party is going to do much better.
Our commitment is to ban them.
I think we're going to have to, unless anyone has a key point that they want to make about some of the issues we've talked about today. Some people have already had a talk. The chap at the back there, right at the very back. Sorry.
I just want to ask a question.
No, I'm sorry, just the chap at the back there. Sorry.
Oh. No, I don't think. I think actually, as I say, he didn't actually. Well, he didn't actually answer the question. Being last night on that, I don't think particularly. In that, it does work for some people. There are people I know who are at uni who actually do enjoy working on 0-hour contracts because it gives them the freedom to do what they want and when they don't want to. It works for them, and that's what I said about choice. Is if it works for you, fantastic. If it's not working for you, then that's why we need to work towards getting people into a full and stable full-time job.
I'm sorry, I know there are people with their hands up. Unfortunately, I've been given the wind-up single by Maria Scrivens, and I daren't, she will have my guts for garters if I disobey her. I'd just like to thank the audience for some very interesting questions and some good responses, and I'd like to thank all the members of the panel for being open and honest and being prepared to take some criticism. So the one point that they will want to make, I suspect, I think we might give them 20 seconds each as a pitch. And Jan, that means 20 seconds. 20 seconds. 20 seconds to say why people should vote Green in May.
We need to get rid of the two-party political state. We need a new politics. The only party that will deliver that in truth is the Green Party. We can have a strong spokesperson in Parliament for Stoke-on-Trent from the Greens.
Thank you. Safika.
As I said before, I'm a family man, I'm father of 3 children, I live locally, I served as a councillor here in this city council, and I work for NHS. I know the daily difficulties people, patients, carers, relatives, parents, they face, and I face the same troubles, same problems. I think I deserve the better chance to have your vote and represent you in the House of Parliament than anybody else sitting on this table.
Well, nicely and personally put there. Tristram.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming this evening. After May the 7th, there's either going to be a Labour government or a Tory government.
Or a coalition.
It's a hung parliament. It's going to be a hung parliament.
There's either going to be a Labour government.
Don't forget that one.
There's either a Labour Prime Minister or a Tory Prime Minister. With the Lib Dems, with the Lib Dems supporting the Tories.
He's predicting already.
So if you believe in a publicly funded National Health Service, if you believe in having qualified teachers in the classroom and working to transform education in Stoke-on-Trent, if you believe in abolishing the bedroom tax, if you believe in a jobs guarantee for young people, if you believe in cutting tuition fees from £9,000 to £6,000, and if you believe in returning a Member of Parliament passionately committed to this city, supporting its ceramics industry, supporting its economic transformation, then I would urge you to vote Labour again. Thank you.
Liam.
Well, I'm not going to assume that how you're all going to vote and that, what the election result's going to be, because that's all up to you at the end of the day, and I would encourage everyone to vote, regardless of which party, because I think it's important that we all take part of in the electoral process. We've come a long way in the last 5 years. There's still a lot more to do. I think, you know, in terms of with the economy, we've turned the economy around to being the biggest growing economy in the world. The deficit is being reduced. Taxes are being cut. And we're still going to do more. But we've got to have a strong economy to be able to do it. We've got to have a strong economy to be able to invest in the NHS. We've got to have a strong economy to be able to invest in education. We've got to have a strong economy to be able to invest in all of us here. And that will only happen with a return Conservative majority government.
Thank you, Liam. Mick, I know you're going to be brief and to the point.
I think, I'd like to say, I don't think that Tristram's been looking at the bookmakers' odds, because if he did have a look, he'd find out that home Parliament is long odds on. So I don't think it's going to be a Labour or Conservative. It's long odds on, Tristan. Have a look at the odds, something like 1 to 2.
There's one Prime Minister. It's either Tory or Labour.
It's what 1 to 2. He didn't say that.
Okay,
anyway,
you've used up your 20 seconds there, Mick. Why should the people here vote UKIP?
A vote for UKIP would be a vote for common sense. It would be a vote for change. It would be a vote for freedom and democracy. It would be a vote for political correctness. It would be a vote to end the nanny state. It would be a vote to leave the undemocratic, wasteful, corrupt European Union. Vote UKIP. It is the only way.
Thank you. Okay, it's a shame that we have to stop just when things are getting exciting. But I really would like to thank you all for coming, and I'd like to thank the panel. In a round of applause, please. Thank you.